we're on the other side of the Victorian state election of 2022, and the Andrews government has been returned without much skin off them, despite a 6% swing against them. But as far as seat-wise goes, pretty much remaining unchanged. So was this a victory for Labor or a loss for the Liberals? Join us to discuss is independent candidate Cheryl Ainsley from the Nepean electorate, security consultant Mario Beeks, and author of the new book, What is the Price of Freedom? And of course, Caroline Council, one of Australia's leading family law practitioners. Welcome, team.
Morning, Michael.
Now, I can say, obviously, Cheryl, and as myself as independents, we're pretty deflated with the outcome. Mario, you've looked on from afar up in Sydney, and Caroline, fair to say you've been a critic of the Andrews government as well. What are the takeaways?
I wasn't always. It's so bizarre. When COVID first hit, I sort of thought, yeah, no, he's acting protectively. He's looking after the community, because I'm not affiliated with any political party. So my journey in relation to Dan Andrews has been an interesting one, because when it became self-evident to me that this was no longer about protecting us, this was no longer about a numbers game in relation to hospital beds and the ICU units in the various hospitals around Melbourne and Victoria, it became about power. And once a politician is inured in the world of power, and we all know the saying, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So my journey has not been a slam Dan from the get-go. It's been an educative journey of observing, me initially being fully in support of the measures, and then you have the hotel quarantine debacle. You have potential cover-ups. You have a journey of securing Dan and power rather than accountability to the populace.
And I should have mentioned in the warm-up too, Caroline, you're now a life member of the Law Institute of Victoria as well. So as far as a balanced, non-biased opinion goes, I'm fairly sure that we could place that mantle squarely on your shoulders as well as the award, couldn't we?
And yeah, absolutely, Michael. And the Law Institute of Victoria is at pains to focus on policy, not politics. So whenever we as an institution have put a view to Parliament, we have very much done it with the best interests of Victorians in mind, not because we curry favour with either side of the political house, or indeed with the independents, the ever-growing independents. We always approach legislative reform from the perspective about what is good. And sometimes there can be very divisive issues as far as our members are concerned. And we've had to explain to our members, for example, voluntary assisted dying. That can be a very divisive issue for a cohort like the Lawyers of Victoria. But as we explained to them, and I even had to get my head around this, it is far better that we weigh in as an organisation, as lawmakers, to persuade the lawmakers of Victoria, or the law supporters, to persuade the lawmakers of Victoria to create good law. So sometimes law can be very unpopular, but we need to ensure that the law is good for all. And when law needs to be reformed, we are often that voice at the coalface with government to say, this is actually bad law, or this law is redundant, or it no longer represents the mores of our society and it needs reform.
Yep. Now, Cheryl, in your electorate, we actually saw a seat flip with Sam Groff getting up as the Liberal member. Good for the electorate, bad for the electorate? How do you feel you went as an independent? So a bit to unpack in that massive question.
Yeah. Look, I think down in my electorate, I was on the booths every single day, and I definitely saw the anti-Dan or the anti-Labor Party sentiment flowing through. So, you know, that could be a combination. Sam Groff's obviously a celebrity, being a tennis, pro or ex-tennis pro. So that could have been a big influence, but there was definitely a lot of passion. There was, quite a few instances at the booths where we saw that passion, that anti-Dan sentiment. So I must say, when I came back and was watching the election results unfold, I was really surprised, because I couldn't believe that what I had seen had resulted in Daniel Andrews getting back in. What I was very proud of is that I did some great deals with getting second preferences. So I am happy that Sam Groth, out of the Labor and Liberal candidates that we had, I'm happy that Sam's in. One concern I have is, will Sam and the Liberal Party down here for Nepean be punished? Because there's this ongoing situation where if you're in opposition in a seat, you won't get any funding. And it comes back to what I've been saying through my whole campaign, is that funding should be based on merit. And there are some big projects that need to happen in Nepean: the hospital, the Jetty Road overpass. We have a really, really terrible situation down here with affordable housing and homelessness, rough sleepers. So these things need to be addressed. And I am hoping that the Labor, government that's now in will still go ahead with these projects, even though the candidate down here is in opposition. So it's a hope. But I do fear for us down here in Nepean that we will be punished because we don't have a member of the government in our seat.
Now, Mario, with your travels around through Eastern Europe and dealing with some colourful, should we say, governments across the thing, in the lead up to this, I think it was our own John Heron said that if this was an election in Zimbabwe, the UN would have called it invalid, with what we saw with the Sack Dan Andrews party being started by an Andrews staffer, the preference deals being done for money with the preference whisperer, Darren Hinch giving John's own preferences off to the Animal Justice Party, who voted down every justice reform put forward. How did you think it went from afar?
Look, first of all, I don't understand how the leader of the Labour Party in Victoria can win election when this same leader couldn't attend some sports events we know before the elections and can't walk on a street freely, without having the protective squad around him. Look, I was hoping for you, for yourself, Michael, and Sharelle, and everybody else, that they're gonna have the seat in Parliament and gonna be different. And I can't find a reason. I can't find a proof to say it's being rigged, but this is certainly something. It's been manipulated. There's no way that this gentleman, this Labour leader, Daniel Andrews, actually won elections. I can't believe it. That doesn't have any communism as well. We knew it in communism. We had the one person we can vote, and he always going to win. Doesn't matter what votes go there. But I truly believe that people of Victoria didn't vote that way. I think they found a way how they can manipulate results. And, from Sydney watching this, I was just in disbelief. Honestly, in disbelief. I couldn't believe that night when he walked on the stage and say, I won. The best part it is, I told myself, whatever this guy, he promised, literally, this guy, he promised. He's not my leader. He's nothing to me. He's somebody who is a leader of some party there in Victoria. He promises so much. And now the question is, what is going to be delivered? We know that it will not be delivered. And that's the reason why I think that you guys should hold him accountable. And I say, I'm still in disbelief. I am.
The problem is, though, we have the ambulance system that he promised at the last election that he was going to fix, and it is worse now. So he's got a track record, or he's got form of not following through on his promises. And that's the scary thing. He throws promises out like, candy, and never ever seems to deliver.
But he knows why, so interrupted. We know why he promised this. We know it's going to come. Next one spin's going to come. It's inflation, it's recession, it's blaming Chinese, it's blaming this, it's blaming that. That was organized, that was orchestrated. I'm just waiting for the first possible, the public appearance going to say it's everybody's fault. And what he promised should be held accountable. Not just him, but his entire cabinet should be held accountable. But as you say, Cheryl, the ambulance thing, he promising, it doesn't delivering, it doesn't help the people. It doesn't help the ordinary citizens and taxpayers in Victoria. And now that phenomena of the green energy, right? I mean, we are in the summer, we have the more clouds than sun. You know, what is that for? You know, I mean, destroying everything around us. So, you know, I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit heated, but, you know, that's to me, Labor, if Labor is good, I'll just give me this one to say. If Labor is good, communism will leave. End of the story. That's what it is.
Now, Caroline,
I was going to say, Michael, it's
I'm sorry.
I think no, and thank you, Mario. And you're right, because it's actually a very cloudy day here. So good luck with renewables, ruining the day. Sherelle, I think your fear is well founded. You know, my observations of the personality that is Dan, it's my way or the highway. And if you are in opposition to me, I will do everything in my power to crush, kill, destroy. His statement that he will rule for all Victorians, or he will lead, sorry, slip of the tongue, he will lead for all Victorians. I think that's highly problematic and highly unlikely. He's going to hang on to power. What it's going to take, I suspect, Michael, is his own party.
Yeah.
He's going to get on the nose at some stage, and then the knives will come. And I think that looking at the Liberal Party and the fact that it is in complete disarray, the fact that it doesn't really resonate with the voting populace anymore, that it needs to go back to the drawing board and it needs to find a different way. I think change of leadership weakens the party, and I think Labor has stuck with Dan, and it's worked, whereas the converse is true for the Liberal Party. Change your leadership at your peril. I think the voters have had enough of the party politic, with the knives being drawn and the heads of leaders being cut off. I think we're over that. But I think we also need to get away from the cult of the individual, unless you are voting for an independent who hopefully can then be the counter voice in Parliament. Yeah. I think party politics has to reinvent itself so that we're not personality driven and we're not personality dependent, because you can see what happens in the shape of Dan Andrews when you have the cult of personality ruling.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, we've got the Liberal Party. They lost this election, in my opinion, when they decided to bring back Matthew Guy.
Oh, absolutely.
That was the biggest mistake. They went from Mr. Invisible in O'Brien, ineffective, to Mr. More Baggage on a Qantas flight with Matthew Guy. And while people were quick to keep throwing up lobster with the mobster, they seemed to forget that we had Dan Andrews having dinner with Woodman, who was representing Modaffri anyway. So they were both tarred with the same brush, if you cared to look there. But the whole narrative around the would you rather Guy or Andrews, the whole is it better to vote for the lesser of two evils or vote for the devil? You know, well, the problem with that is you still end up with evil or the devil. And the fact that there is no alternative, the fact that independents, and I'm not just saying this because I was an independent and Cheryl was an independent, but the fact that it's still seen as a binary choice. Which bitter pill do you want to swallow? Do you want to die on the end of a rope or on the end of a knife type thing? Choose your poison. That whole narrative needs to go, because, you know, just being better than the worst choice shouldn't be how we elect our leaders.
Can I make 2 points on that? So the first point I want to make is that, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is I was surprised at the booths how many people came with that preset idea, and they really didn't look at who their options were. I had a few people, and I was very proud of this, that came to me and they said, if all of these people in the electorate watched the forum that I did, you know, with the other candidates, they said you were the most qualified, and literally people thought I would win. They literally believed that I was the best candidate. So again, that whole colours the education of our voters, people don't understand the preference system. They don't understand how it works. And that was even, I was talking with volunteers from other parties, they didn't know how it works. And they were in the political space. So that's one point. But the other point I wanted to make is, and Michael, I'm really interested to see if you got this feedback as well, is this level of marketing that's being applied to the major parties. Now, in my electorate, the Liberal Party had their how to vote on one side and they had Daniel Andrews' face on the other. And the interesting thing is people would see the face, Daniel Andrews' face, and say, no, I don't want that. And this is where I think the marketing and the focus groups are too involved, because people literally wouldn't take the paper because it had Daniel Andrews' face on it. And it was such, like, I kept saying to the Liberal Party team, why are you doing this? And they ended up saying to hide it. You know, they were even, yeah.
Sherelle, bizarre marketing choice. And I'd be interested to hear what Mario has to say about this. I voted outside of my electorate because I happen to be down in Melbourne, not here in my home electorate. And I'm walking past Dan. I went, wow, the Labor Party's really putting the boat out there for Dan. It was the Liberal Party placards. And I just thought, oh my God. I thought, talk about the not so hidden persuader. You're seeing Dan's face as you go in, and what are you thinking? You're thinking Dan. It's like don't think of the red bus. And what do you think of? Immediately, the red bus.
Yep.
And Sherelle, I was gobsmacked. I thought, oh my God, how could you have got this so wrong? And what sort of money was spent on that as an idea? What a terrible idea.
Can I just add now 2 cents, two points as a Sherelle? Number one, for that marketing, you all must understand that marketing has not been run with the mature people. It's the people behind the screens, the young people and everything else, and they're doing different ways. Like I know how it's through my business when we do analysis of competitors, so I can see more and more these focus groups are younger guys and everything else. So like they're doing this digital type, what's gonna people like it, the colors, it's that was wrong. But I have a question for you, Caroline. This is now the legal advice I'm seeking, like a Michael at the beginning, right? How is it even possible? How is it even possible? Even in communism, that was not happening. Honestly, I was living in communism, it's happening. When you have the leader of the party has 5 charges in anti-corruption commission, is allowed to run for the premier. If I done this, in my job, they will crucify me. Whatever it is, how dare you, whatever it is, they will throw everything on top of me, on you, because you're associated with me. But now we have the leader who has 5 IBAC probes. I think that's called the probes, whatever it's called, right? And still he's running for the premier. Now, what is the legality? What's the legacy you're leaving and giving to the people of Victoria? The law doesn't apply to me, but everybody of you does. And I'm going to be premier. So maybe I'm mistaken, but again.
Yeah. Well, Mario, fascinating you should say that, because while I was having my coffee before going to vote, I met 2 neighbours who were similarly having a coffee. And I said, so, who are you casting your vote for today? You don't need to tell me. Oh, they said, oh, Dan. And I said, I'm shocked. At your age and stage in life, I expected to hear something a little more blue. And they said, oh, no, we're voting for Dan, aren't you? And I said, you know what? My biggest problem as a lawyer is the fact that there are 5 IBAC investigations. It's the manipulation of IBAC that most concerns me. So any form of accountability between the populace and government that is then manipulated by government concerns me greatly as a lawyer. So in any other political sphere, if somebody has a cloud over their head, and Dan would say, oh, nothing proven here, there's been no adverse findings against me, I don't need to do anything. But we hear it time and time again at any other political coalface. I'm stepping aside, ... whilst that criminal investigation is undergoing, whilst that IBAC or Anti-Corruption Commission investigation is ongoing. If I've been called and I'm accountable to an Anti-Corruption Commission, I would have a cloud over my head. He may well say, oh, I'm just a witness. It's actually nothing to do with me. They haven't found anything. I'm a free agent. I don't need to sit aside. But how many times do we see, whilst this investigation is ongoing, I've elected to step aside? We haven't heard that. We haven't heard anything other than nothing to see here, folks, move along. It's interesting, you know, the voice of Deborah Glass is such an important voice. And you watch what happens with IBAC. So what we're going to see is the manipulation, I think. This is what I'm predicting. Yeah. Continued manipulation, downgrading, you know, dismissing IBAC and what IBAC's trying to do. That's my prediction.
Thank you, Caroline. But that's what I need, because I'm not a legal person. I have nothing. I don't know nothing about law. But as a senior,
I don't think he has to he doesn't have to step aside. That's quite clear. Otherwise, you know, that would have been on the front pages of some of the newspapers.
Yeah,
he doesn't have to step aside while those investigations are ongoing. And he's saying, "I've got nothing. There's nothing on me. I haven't been."
Yeah,
found.
but if that's in the case of Michael or Sharelle or, you know, any other people with us on the panel, it will be crucified, you know what I mean, across the newspapers and anything else. And that's what worries me. So I thank you, Caroline.
And Caroline, when you say nobody steps aside, been a few that miraculously stepped aside. We had Ken Lay announce his retirement just before the ambulance report, the damning ambulance report came out. We had Chris Eccles. Oh, no, I didn't make the phone call, but I don't want to be a distraction, so I'll step aside. We've now got...
But they're not Dan. That's the point.
Yep.
So in other words, yeah.
Like that's everybody goes under that bus.
Interesting.
So Andrews believes he can handle the narrative because some of those other people may still have a tenuous grasp on integrity. So when they're before the media, they may actually answer with integrity. Whereas Andrews is prepared to know, I can stand up and deflect and bat this off. And so you go away so the media can't come to you and leave it to me to play this. And when we go back to the how to votes with the Liberals that you mentioned, Sharelle, I actually saw people coming back out, handing them back to the Liberal candidates going, no, I want the Labor one. And I think that was actually part of their strategy. If we can trick them into thinking this is Dan, we'll vote for them. But it just goes to show how much they didn't have confidence in Matthew Guy, not to have Matthew Guy on it. And the golden rule of advertising used to be never mention the competitor's name. So Coke would never say we're better than Pepsi, and Pepsi would never mention Coke. And here we have the whole Liberals campaign based around with, he's bad. Like, you know, where's the positive spin on it? And that's...
Media training 101 says do not emphasize the negative. So even if somebody putting a question to you couches it in the negative, the last thing you do is pick that up and run with it. Yeah. You change it to the positive message that you're trying to put out. That's why I said truly bizarre. If I were the Liberal Party, I'd be demanding my dollars back from those advertisers. But they would have signed off on it. They would have approved this.
No, it wasn't just signed off on, because I know that they were querying it within days down at my booth, and they were doubling down, saying, "No, this is the right strategy."
Yeah, and let's be clear here before we get into the conspiracy theory, because I've had them all come at me. I've had a million people. I voted for you. Everyone in my family voted for you. I don't know anyone. You're twice as likely to find somebody who didn't vote for Dan Andrews as did. 3.5 people out of every 10 voted for Dan Andrews. And I'm not saying that that's unfair. That's the system we have here. And could we rightfully say now that 35% is the new 45%, given the federal election results? And, you know, to actually be able to come together, are we as independents and the minor parties making it worse? Are we actually playing a slight defensive role by fragmenting the vote that 35% becomes a majority?
But I don't think so, because still, you know, my preferences definitely didn't go to Labor way. The problem I have, and I'm going to say this and it'll, it may be wrong, but like people don't understand, literally don't understand that a vote for the Greens is really a vote for Labor. I believe a vote for animal justice is a vote for Labor. They don't understand. So people were literally coming up, like I literally had opposing candidates standing next to me not understanding that. And this is where I come back to that education part, is that people don't understand that if you vote for Green, yes, you feel good and you get that warm fuzzy or whatever it is, but that is actually a vote for Labor, and they don't get it. So I actually think, my preferences definitely didn't go that way, or my suggested preferences. And I don't know what your preferences were, Michael, but I don't know that we're fragmenting it. I think one thing that really just stood out to me is that we have to improve the education of people who are voting.
100%. That was without doubt the biggest shock for me, was the amount of people. And these weren't young voters coming in for the first or second time at it. These were older people who are you giving your preferences to? And I would even put the link to the VEC. I can't give your preferences to anyone in the lower house. Here's the link to the thing. Why won't you give me a straight answer? And it's like, I understand the distrust in our elected officials now after doing this show. Completely understand that. But I don't understand the fact that so many people don't understand our system. And then I would have people throw at me, you've got the Liberals at number 3 on your preferences. You're just a Liberal stooge. And then I would point out to them, Labor has Liberals at number 4 on their preferences and me at number 5 on their preferences. So by your logic, Labor's trying to help Liberals get elected.
Happened to me as well. Sam Groff was higher on the Labor card than I was. And I was like,
can I just add something, like Cheryl, she's right for the Greens. And, if you walk on the street, I talk about my own child who is 20 years old, who blames me that I destroyed the planet. I destroyed the planet, and I said to him, okay, so all these phones and computers, where they're coming from, they're holding hands and dancing kumbaya, they come from the nothing. So you are the consumer as well. But the younger generations, they will go with everybody who's going to promise them, it's going to be clean air, they're going to be vaccinated, they're going to have the, beautiful life and everything else. And Cheryl, she was right. They will go for the Greens, which is basically the Labor. And when you see the Greens, we see them as an insignificant force. But, again, we have the big scandal in the Greens where the senator was being related to the bikies and sitting on a security committee. And it's just my friend, Now, the people need to be educated. Michael was absolutely right. And I blame this for this media, because media really utilize and go that side who pays more money and whatever they're leaning towards. And they're going to push, you guys independence. Michael, I disagree with you. I think the world needs independent. World need independent people. Everybody needs now, because the system we're living now for 200 years, it's proved that 2 major parties are just a career politicians sitting in the parliament. Look at the average age in the parliament Congress in US, 70 years old. 5 generations are sitting there. They're doing nothing. So world needs independent, and Greens are the Labor. Yes, Cheryl.
Yeah. And now we have the ridiculous situation where we have John Pizzuto running for the Liberal leadership. This is a man who was on such a wafer-thin margin in his electorate that they could actually have a one-term opposition leader come next election. Have they learned nothing going with the status quo? If ever there was a need for a complete knockdown and rebuild, this isn't just a new coat of paint type job. This is a complete ground up rebuild where, we're all great fans of Ryan Smith. He's thrown his support behind Brad Batten. But, we don't need, and I like these people personally, but we don't need David Davis. We don't need John Pizzuto, who could be gone, and they will throw everything at that electorate. And it's that whole area is shifting teal and green. We don't need Georgie Crozier. We don't need more of the old guard. We need a complete contemporary Liberal Party, a viable opposition. Even if they don't get in, they need to hold this other mob to account, because they've basically been running around witches' hats on the football field now. There's been no opposition. And as much as we like to criticise the Andrews government, they only had to be better than their opposition, and I'm as cranky at the opposition.
I'm also cranky about their structures. Like, and I don't know, Ian Cook's not here today, but I don't understand how the VEC got the 2 candidate preferred situation in Mulgrave so wrong. Like, I think Blind Freddie could tell you that the 2 candidates that were going up there were going to be Dan Andrews and Ian Cook. Like, the media was all over it. Yet they very simply, we just put the Liberal candidate, Liberal versus Labor. Like, they didn't do that mistake in Mornington where there was a Teal versus the Liberal Party. So you can't say it was just because it was an independent. So this is where I get concerned, where these government bodies, I'm not going to say it's deliberate, but it feels very unusual or incompetent that they can't read the actual electorate or what the 2 candidate preferred, and the whole drama that's now blown up with that.
Sherelle, how did you find it where, as an independent, we're allowed to have one A-frame at a polling station? The majors are allowed to have 2 plus 2 advertising hoardings, and
6 in total, because you can have the upper house, the lower house, and you can have your party one. So
and we're allowed one A-frame.
Yeah.
Explain.
So that requires reform.
Yeah.
That is a blatant manipulation of the voting process. I'm sorry. If there's a level playing field between candidates, you have to make it level. You can't say, oh, the major parties get more than the independents. That to me is rubbish. That's got to go immediately.
Yeah.
So if anything, there should be an agitation immediately about how unfair those, and again, the average person on the tram would say, you're kidding me. I ... didn't know that.
Yep.
And the donation laws. The donation laws.
Donation laws need review.
Yep.
Advertising needs review. You know, it needs a major shakedown, in my opinion.
Yep.
It's
And
almost like the model
Yep.
belonged back in the 1950s, and it hasn't kept pace. I opened with the fact that law needs to be changed to reflect the standards and the mores of society at a given time. This is true of the election process. I'm sorry, it just needs reform.
Yeah,
but some of these laws are new too, though. They've just
bad law.
Yeah.
So that's that. Bad law doesn't have to remain on the books, and it doesn't have to remain on the books for long. It needs to be challenged. It's a bit like watching the AFL constantly. Sorry, Mario, I'm going to talk about AFL. I know that's probably not your game of choice up in New South Wales. But it's like the AFL constantly tweaking and tweaking and tweaking rules. It doesn't mean that all those rules are good. And they'll often see it then in play and say, yeah, actually, that was a bad rule. And at least they have the common sense to say, we're winding that back.
Yeah.
Not so with the VEC. VEC really needs petitioning in relation to...
Can I just for the end, because another Michael wants to, it's time to wind up. I'm afraid only one thing now after elections, and that is, I said this before in our shows, the level of vindictiveness and being revengeful, it's just about to be seen. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to look like a Bartolomeo Nights. And this is what I'm worrying about these things, right now, because I know that he will try to settle the scores with everybody who was against him. So, that's the one thing we just want to see it. So I apologize, Michael, and for taking what.
I'm going to close with, because we've got to wind up, one of my dear old dads, one that I use every day. You can have payback or you can have progress. The two can never go together. So hopefully we're more about progress than payback. So we'll wind it up there, team. Great to see everyone again. Well done, Sherelle. You ran a really good campaign. Proud of you. Caroline, congratulations. Law Institute of Victorian Life membership. Wow. Good work. And Mario, as always, the book's going gangbusters. Where can they get it?
I'm gonna say just so you can distribute everybody, from the panel. And it's coming new one. We're gonna involve you again, because thank you, Michael, for forward. I'm gonna talk about misinformation, disinformation in COVID in Australia. It's my newest book coming out. So yeah.
Fantastic. All right, team. See you all next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.